Hello again, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Six-Pack NFL Preview Podcast Series. I'm your host, as always, Travis, and of course I'm joined by our resident expert, Noah. Noah, what's going on?
I'm ready to talk about the Rams.
Yeah, definitely one of the more stacked teams in terms of fantasy relevance. They put up a terrible showing in the Super Bowl. That was lame. But, playoffs, that doesn't matter for fantasy sports. But yeah, it should be good. We got a lot of names that are fun and a lot of good stats. It was surprising how many stats some of these guys had, I should say. Before we get into that, time for plugs. You can follow me at TheRealTravioli on Twitter. Noah?
You can find me at Noah Spurlock NFL. That's Noah Spurlock NFL.
Yeah, so be sure to hit us up there if you have questions about our rankings or how we feel about this guy or the other guy. We'll happily answer them for you. Also, be sure to subscribe and go give us some thumbs up on YouTube, Fantasy Six Pack. That's where you will find this episode. You'll also find all our old episodes, and you'll find all our future episodes. So go just join up so you never miss a thing. But that's enough for plugs. Now into one of the more stacked teams, like I said, the NFC champions, the Los Angeles Rams, and they are helmed by quarterback Jared Goff, who had a pretty fantastic season last year. Threw for 4,688 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions, which is a pretty good stat line. He did have a few bumps along the road, but overall, it's kind of a fantasy stud. So Noah, what are we thinking about Jared Goff going into this year? Are we seeing him take another step forward?
I think he'll take a minor step forward. I feel like the more years that you're in the league, obviously there's going to be some improvement. I don't think it'll necessarily be the improvement we saw from season 2 to season 3 or season 1 to season 2, but I still think he's going to get a little bit better. I think that for fantasy, he's established himself as kind of a lower end starter, somebody you can trust every week, just because he does have very good weapons and he isn't a very good coaching staff. So he's not really going to wow you. I don't expect a top 5 finish, but I certainly don't expect a bad season.
Yeah, he seems like a pretty bankable starter, but doesn't have the superstar ceiling that I think you kind of look for in a lot of your quarterbacks. Not that he doesn't have the ability to, have a major season, because looking up and down this roster, it's loaded with stars, and he's, throwing the ball to all of them. So that definitely leads to production. But yeah, I think your description of him is pretty spot on, and I would be very happy to end up with Jared Goff, but I'm not sure I'm building my team around Jared Goff. He's not my main target. But yeah, all right. Well, hopefully he can keep up his stats from last year and keep rolling, because he's been a pleasant surprise the last couple of years. But that's enough about Jared. You got something left to say about Jared Goff?
Nah, I don't. I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought we had a last-minute tidbit, but whatever. All right, on to the more fun names. No offense, Jared Goff, but Todd Gurley is sort of the star on the offensive side of his franchise, and he was a star last year for all fantasy players. He had 1,251 rush yards, 17 touchdowns, caught 59 passes for another 580 yards, and 4 touchdowns, but he did have some weird leg question marks down the stretch and then into the playoffs. So that might give some drafters some pause. They also spent a third-round pick on Darrell Henderson, so he's in the mix, and so is Malcolm Brown. He had 200-ish yards last year, a couple catches, but, if there is any injury to Gurley, he would be a guy to look at as well. So, Noah, how are you approaching Gurley? Do you think he's being overdrafted, underdrafted? Or do you think any of these backup guys have any worth?
I mean, it's so tough with Gurley because people can read into things all that they want, but at the end of the day, nobody has any idea what's going on with Disney. Nobody knows how healthy he is. He might get a full workload this year. He might really split with Darrell Henderson. So I don't necessarily know if I would call him overdrafted, just because if he does end up getting 100% of the work and his knee really isn't an issue, then he would certainly be a good pick. But he's certainly not the type of guy that I want on my team just because I think he's too risky.
So if he was sitting there, the turn in the second round, he's somebody you would pass on for another superstar type guy?
Yeah, probably. And then with Darrell Henderson, I'm not a fan of his either, just because you're sacrificing a 6th-round draft pick for him, and at the end of the day, you might be getting like no usage out of him because Todd Gurley might get all the work, and who even knows how good he's gonna be. So I'm not a fan of Darrell Henderson in the 6th.
These confusing sort of playing time questions are always an interesting situation when you come to a draft, because if Todd Gurley keeps falling but ends up getting all the work, he's going to be a great value. But if he gets half the work, that's a terrible pick. And vice versa for Henderson. If he gets half the work, that's a good pick. If he gets none of the work, you're just throwing away a draft pick.
Yeah.
So those are situations I tend to avoid. But I mean, somebody's going to take early and somebody's going to take them high. But I would be a little worried unless stuff comes out in training camp or preseason that like, oh yeah, Todd Gurley is getting like 95% of the work for the first 2 months or whatever. It would need some sort of affirmation for me to jump on board. But yeah, it's a weird situation there in Los Angeles. But good news for them. They also have a pretty fantastic stable of receivers. Brandin Cooks caught 80 balls last year for just over 1,200 yards, 5 touchdowns. Robert Woods, 86 catches, 1,219 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And Cooper Kupp was fast becoming a fantasy stud before his injury. He only played 8 games, but put up 40 catches, 566 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So, they didn't have the huge highest touchdown numbers, but do you like one more than the other? You a fan of all of them, none of them? How are we approaching these guys?
I definitely like Woods and Cooks. I think that they're safe guys. I think in a system like this, they're going to get work just because Jared Goff spreads the ball around so much. And obviously, there will be some games where one of them does a lot better than the other, but it'll even out in the end. So in terms of how I think the end of the year production will shape up, I think that Woods and Cooks will be pretty comparable. But as for Cooper Kupp, I'm actually not a huge fan of him. He's being drafted right behind Woods and Cooks, and I just think it's really hard to come off of a torn ACL and be the same player that you were last year. And also, Josh Reynolds, he was pretty good last year in Kupp's place. While I don't think Reynolds will get enough work to be like a fantasy player, a fantasy football asset, I certainly don't think he's going to get like 0 catches a game. So I think he might end up kind of taking a slice of Kupp's work. So I'm not a fan of Kupp.
Yeah, the ACL injury is definitely a bummer because he was having a great year last year, but then coming back from that is definitely tough. I do love Robert Woods. I've thought he's been underrated for a couple of years, but last year and this year, it does seem that he's being properly valued. I just think Goff looks for him a lot more over the middle, and Cooks is more of a deep threat, so I've always been a Woods fan. Cooks pretty fantastic too. But now going through all of these receivers, it makes me like Jared Goff more than when we talked about him 5 minutes ago. It's like these guys have skills, and it's going to be hard to cover all of them, especially in that division with the 49ers and the Cardinals, who don't really have secondaries. So that's like four games of should be pretty easy production. So I know we don't talk a lot about division, like in the effect that could have, but a lot of those teams in that division don't have corners. So I am on board with Woods. My order would be Woods, Cooks, Kupp, but hopefully they're all fantastic because this is a fun team, and you want these guys to produce because they're fun to watch. Unless you're playing them in fantasy, in which case you do not want them to produce. You want them to have the worst weeks of their season. While they do have stars at all the other positions, tight end for the Los Angeles Rams, they don't have the biggest names there. Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett are the two guys vying for snaps. I think I know where you're going to go with this, Noah, but what are we doing with these guys? Are we drafting them or just leaving them on the wire?
I think that Higbee and Everett are two talented guys, but I think they kind of cut into each other's work too much to the point where I'm not drafting either of them.
Yeah, and I mean, sort of your point even with Kupp and Reynolds just a minute ago, like if there's going to be a lack of passes for receivers, there's going to be even less opportunities for these tight ends who, could catch some touchdowns because it is a high-scoring offense, and if they try to, catch some people in matchups, you could get a couple big games from these tight ends, but there's no way you're going to be able to predict that. So I think you're right in saying just sort of keep an eye on them, and if they start playing at a high level, grab them before somebody else does. Okay, that is it for the Los Angeles Rams. We're going to end it, as we always do, by asking Noah which of these players he likes the best. So, Noah, one of these guys must be on your fantasy team. Who are you picking?
It's pretty much a tie between Robert Woods and Brandin Cooks, but I think I would go Cooks just because I think he could really be a weak winner at times for you, and Woods doesn't really have that kind of potential. I just love Cooks' speed.
Yeah, we may not have mentioned it in the actual receiver preview, but he's definitely the deep threat of the three. So if they start airing it out a little more this year, Cooks will definitely be the beneficiary of that. So, but yeah, all right, good pick, Noah. That is it for the Los Angeles Rams. As we roll through the NFC, if you have questions or comments, hit us up on YouTube or on Twitter, and keep subscribing, keep sending in questions. And you know what? Just go subscribe to the YouTube channel because it'll make it so much easier for you to find these videos, and it would mean a lot to us. But anyway, I'm Travis. He's Noah. Until next time, guys, catch you later.
See ya.